The three words she mouthed from across the street were a ghost's whisper, a desperate prayer aimed at the one man everyone else was trained to avoid. "Please, help me." The plea didn't register as sound, only as a seismic shift in the city's concrete heart, an old frequency he hadn't tuned into for a decade but could never truly forget. It was the sound of a trap springing shut, the sound of a life about to be ruined. And for the first time in 10 years, the monster inside Silas Kane stirred from its slumber. He stood under the sterile awning of a Michelin-starred restaurant, the kind of place that polished its cutlery with the broken dreams of the people who slept on the grates just a block away. The night air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and exhaust fumes, a cocktail of wealth and decay. Silas, at 48 years old, was a monument carved from the very granite of this city. He was a giant, 6'4" of disciplined muscle packed into a bespoke Brioni suit, the color of a midnight storm. The fabric, a Super 180S wool, probably cost more than the annual income of the family living in the battered sedan parked illegally down the street. A 5-kilo, 24-karat gold Cuban link chain, thick as a thumb, rested against his collarbone, a solid, immutable statement of power. On his hands, a collection of sovereign rings and a single brutalist gold piece set with a flawless 3-carat black diamond. But the jewelry was just window dressing. The real story was written on his skin. From the collar of his custom-tailored shirt crawled the intricate grayscale script of a tattoo that covered his entire neck. On the right side, the words, "Forgive me, Father," were woven through a tapestry of thorns and dying roses. On the left, "For I have sinned," disappeared into the shadow of his jawline. His hands, when they weren't covered by driving gloves, told their own brutal narrative. Across the 8 knuckles of his massive fists, the words "Hold" and "Fast" were inked in a stark, prison yard font. This was Silas, the Ghost Kane, a name whispered in fear for 15 years as he single-handedly built and controlled the most dominant narcotics empire the city's narrows had ever seen. He was called the Ghost not because he was dead, but because for 15 years you never saw him coming. You only ever saw the aftermath. Then, 10 years ago, he had vanished, not into a grave or a federal prison, but into a self-imposed exile. The empire was dismantled, the territory ceded, the soldiers sent home. The ghost had died so Silas Kane could live. The catalyst was a tragedy so profound it had fractured his soul. A stray 9mm round from a rival's sloppy drive-by, meant for him, had instead found his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, as she played on the swings in their fortified backyard, the one place she was supposed to be safe. That single bullet had ended 2 lives, hers and the life of the ghost. He had traded his throne of blood and fear for a quiet kingdom of grief, pouring his illicit fortune into legitimate holdings. A portfolio of prime real estate, a successful high-end security firm, and a silent partnership in 3 of the city's most exclusive restaurants, including the one he was now leaving. He had spent the last 3,650 days meticulously burying the ghost, burying the instincts, the cold calculus of violence, the language of the street. But as the girl across the street mouthed those 3 words, her eyes wide with a terror so pure it was a physical force, he felt the dirt shifting on the grave. She was young, maybe 16 or 17, her face pale and smudged with grime under the jaundiced glow of the streetlight. She was holding the hand of a smaller child, a little boy who looked about 7, and with her other hand, she clutched the strap of a ragged backpack as if it were a life raft. A man was with them, or rather, He was crowding them, his body language a textbook of predatory intent. He was all leering smiles and casual touches to her arm that made her flinch. He was a wolf, and she was looking for a bigger wolf. Her eyes scanned the street, past the laughing couples and indifferent doormen, and landed on Silas. She didn't see a man in a nice suit. She saw power. She saw danger. And in her desperation, she decided to aim that danger at the thing that was scaring her now. Silas gave a nearly imperceptible nod. A motion so small, it was less a physical act and more a disturbance in the air. It said, "I see you." It said, "Stay put." The girl's eyes widened further, a flicker of disbelief, then hope. The man beside her, greasy and insignificant, hadn't noticed. He was too busy trying to steer her towards a dark alley between a bookstore and a laundromat. "Come on, sweet thing," he was saying, his voice a viscous crawl. "Just want to talk, show you something." Silas turned to his driver, Dante, who stood ramrod straight by the open door of a gleaming black Bentley Mulsanne. Dante was a relic from the old life, the only one Silas had kept close. His former lieutenant, now his head of personal security. Dante had seen the exchange. He always saw everything. His hand had moved instinctively to the inside of his jacket. "Not yet," Silas said, his voice a low rumble, like stones grinding together deep underground. "Let's see how this plays out. Give him enough rope." The predator, whose name was probably something stupid like Slim or Rat, got more insistent. He grabbed the girl's arm tighter. The little boy tried to pull away, his small face a mask of fear. That was the moment. The line. Children were the line. For Silas, they were the beginning and the end of every law that mattered. He started walking. He didn't run. Silas Kane did not run. He moved with the deliberate, inexorable gravity of a planet, his $1,000 leather shoes making no sound on the pavement. The street seemed to part for him. The ambient noise of the city, the distant sirens, the chatter, the music spilling from bars, all of it seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of his own breathing, slow and controlled. The ghost was walking again. Subscribe now, because what happens next proves that the most dangerous-looking person is sometimes the only one who can save you. Comment where you're watching from. This story will remind you that true saviors don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear gold chains and tattoos full of regret. The predator didn't see him coming until Silas's shadow fell over him, a sudden eclipse of the streetlight. He looked up, annoyed, ready to spit a curse. The words died in his throat. His eyes traveled up the mountain of tailored wool, over the expanse of chest and shoulders, to the face of a man who looked like he was carved from retribution itself. He saw the cold, dead calm in Silas's eyes. He saw the tattoos on his neck. He saw the heavy gold on his fists. And in that moment, he understood he had made a catastrophic, life-altering mistake. "Excuse me," Silas said, the words polite but the tone holding the chilling finality of a judge's gavel. "I believe the young lady is not interested in your conversation." The predator, Slim or Rat or whatever his name was, tried to puff out his chest. It was a pathetic, reflexive gesture of bravado. "Who the hell are you? This ain't your business, old man." Silas almost smiled. Old man. It was quaint. "I'm the man who's making it my business," he said quietly. He didn't raise his voice. He never had to. His reputation was an amplifier. He looked at the man's hand, still clamped on the girl's arm. "You have 3 seconds to remove your hand before I remove it for you." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of procedure, a promise. The man's eyes darted around, looking for his courage, and found none. He saw Dante now, standing by the Bentley, looking as serene and as deadly as a shark in a tailored suit. He let go of the girl's arm, as if it were red-hot iron. She immediately pulled the little boy behind her, creating a small human shield of her own body. "My mistake," the predator stammered, trying to back away. "No problem here." "Oh, there's a problem," Silas said, taking a step forward as the man tried to take one back, closing the space. "The problem is, I saw you, and now I can't unsee you." He reached into his suit jacket, and the man flinched, expecting a weapon. Silas pulled out a slim, platinum card case. He expertly flicked out a business card. It wasn't one for his real estate firm. It was blank, except for a single, embossed symbol, a stylized G inside a circle, an old marker, a ghost from the past. "I'm going to give you this," Silas said, holding the card between two fingers. "And you're going to take it to your boss. If you don't have a boss, you're going to find the nearest person who thinks they run this part of the city, and you're going to give it to them. And you're going to tell them that the ghost saw you touching children. You're going to tell them that these two," he gestured with his chin towards the girl and her brother, "are now under my personal protection, and that if I ever see your face within a 10-block radius of them, or any other child, I will come back to the Narrows myself, and I will personally educate you on why they used to call me what they did. Do you understand me?" The man's face had gone the color of spoiled milk. The name, the ghost, had hit him like a physical blow. It was a history lesson, a horror story told to new recruits to keep them in line. A name that hadn't been spoken aloud in a decade, but had lost none of its power. He nodded, his head bobbing frantically. He snatched the card from Silas's fingers, his hand trembling. "Choose," Silas said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Run and tell your story, or stay and become one." The man didn't need to be told twice. He turned and ran, stumbling over his own feet, disappearing into the same dark alley he'd tried to drag the girl into. He didn't look back. The street was quiet again. The moment had passed. Silas turned to the girl. The terror in her eyes was gone, replaced by a stunned awe. She was still clutching her little brother, who peeked out from behind her legs. "You came," she whispered, the words barely audible. "You actually came." Silas looked down at her, and the hard mask of the ghost softened just for a second. The rage receded, leaving behind the familiar, aching hollow where his daughter's memory lived. He saw the grime on her cheek, the fierce, protective set of her jaw, the old, beyond her years look in her eyes. He saw a survivor. "I keep my promises," he said simply. He knelt, a difficult gesture in the expensive suit, bringing himself down to the little boy's eye level. The child flinched, then held his ground. "What's your name, little man?" The boy looked at his sister. She gave a small nod. "Leo," he said, his voice small. "It's nice to meet you, Leo," Silas said. He looked back at the girl. "And you?" "Maya," she said. "His name is Leo, and that's Rosie." She gestured with her head to the sleeping toddler in a carrier strapped to her chest, a detail Silas hadn't even noticed in the dim light. 3 of them. She was protecting 3 of them. The weight of it hit Silas. This wasn't a one-time rescue. This was the opening chapter of a story he was now a part of. He had stepped across a line. "Where is your home, Maya?" he asked gently. Her eyes flickered towards the underpass a few blocks away, where a small community of tents and tarps huddled in the shadows of the freeway. "We're okay," she said, pride snapping back into her voice. "You did enough. Thank you. Silas stood up, the full, imposing height of him returning. He knew she was lying. He knew what home under an overpass meant. It meant cold, hunger, and a steady supply of predators like the one he'd just run off. No, Silas said, the word an unbreakable vow. I haven't even started. He looked at Dante, who was already on his phone, his voice a quiet, efficient murmur. Dante is arranging a place for you. A warm place. For tonight, and for as many nights as it takes. Maya looked from Silas's face to the Bentley, then back. Her street-smart instincts were at war with the sheer impossibility of the situation. People like him didn't help people like her. They used them or they ignored them. This was a fairy tale, and she knew fairy tales weren't real. Why? She asked, the single word loaded with a lifetime of suspicion and mistrust. Why would you do this? Silas looked at the sleeping baby, Rosie, her small face so peaceful and innocent. He thought of Lily. 10 years, and the ache was as fresh as it was on day one. He had all the money in the world, all the power a man could want, and he couldn't save his own daughter. But maybe, just maybe, he could save someone else's. Because my daughter would have wanted me to, he said, the words raw and honest. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. In that moment, Maya understood. She saw the grief behind the gold, the pain behind the power. She had run from a monster and found a broken king. If this story is proving that desperation can lead to salvation in the most unexpected ways, hit that like button right now and share it with someone who needs to see it. Now back to the story. The suite Dante secured wasn't just a room. It was an indictment of the life Maya and her siblings had been living. It was a 2-bedroom corporate apartment on the 35th floor of a glass tower that scraped the clouds. One of the hundreds of properties in Silas Kane's portfolio. The doorman didn't blink as the hulking man in the Brioni suit, his silent lieutenant, and 3 grimy children walked across the marble lobby. Silas's presence was its own form of currency. His silent glare a warning against judgment. Inside, the world smelled of clean linen and lemon polish. Maya stood frozen in the entryway, Leo and Rosie still attached to her like baby kangaroos. She ran a hand along a plush velvet sofa, her fingers tracing the rich texture as if it were an alien artifact. Leo had already discovered the remote control. His eyes wide as a 70-inch television flickered to life, displaying a kaleidoscope of cartoons. It was the biggest screen he had ever seen. There's a master bedroom with its own bath, Dante said, his voice a low, respectful monotone. He was addressing Maya as if she were a visiting dignitary. A second bedroom with 2 twin beds for the children. The kitchen is fully stocked. I took the liberty of ordering groceries. They'll be here in 20 minutes. Essentials, plus some things kids might like. Maya just stared at him. You bought us food? Mr. Kane was very specific, Dante replied without emotion. He said, and I quote, I want them to feel safe, fed, and warm. In that order, handle it. Silas had stayed behind in the lobby, making a phone call. He didn't want to crowd them, didn't want his intimidating presence to sour this moment of sanctuary. He was on the phone with the head of his security firm. I want a full workup on the encampment under the I-95 overpass at 14th Street. Silas commanded, his voice stripped of all warmth. Every soul living there, names, ages, how they got there. I want to know about vulnerabilities. Specifically, who is preying on them. The man I dealt with tonight, he was a symptom. I want the disease. I want to know who let him off his leash. Use every resource. I want a preliminary report on my desk in 6 hours. A full report in 24. Expense is not a factor. He hung up. The machine was in motion now. For 10 years, he had used his vast resources to build wealth. Now he was pointing that same formidable machine at a different target. He was going to war, not for territory or profit, but for a teenage girl and 2 small children. Upstairs, Maya was giving Leo and Rosie their first real bath in weeks. The tub was bigger than the mattress they shared in the tent. She used the fancy, hotel-sized bottles of shampoo that smelled like lavender and chamomile. As she scrubbed the city grime from Leo's hair, he looked up at her, his face serious. "Is that man a king, Maya?" he asked. Maya paused. She thought of Silas's sheer presence, the way the world seemed to bend around him. "I don't know, Leo," she said softly. "But I think he used to be." Later that night, after the children were asleep, tucked into clean beds with soft sheets for the first time in their memory, Maya sat alone in the vast living room. The city lights twinkled below like a fallen constellation. Dante had left hours ago, after the groceries arrived, and he had shown her how to work the complex security system. She was safe. She was warm. She was fed. And she was more terrified than she had been on the street. This was a dream, and she knew she would have to wake up eventually. Her fingers found the worn fabric of her backpack. She pulled out the contents of Silas's wallet, which she had stolen earlier that day in a desperate, clumsy snatch and run near his restaurant. It felt like a lifetime ago. She hadn't even had a chance to use the cash. She'd seen the predator, the one Silas had run off, cornering another young girl, and had intervened, drawing his attention to herself. That's when Silas had appeared. Inside the wallet, there was $2,300 in crisp $100 bills, a black credit card made of metal, and a single, folded, worn photograph. It was a picture of a little girl with bright eyes and a missing tooth smile, sitting on a swing, Lily. Maya traced the girl's face with her fingertip. She finally understood. This wasn't about charity. This wasn't about pity. This was about a debt owed to a ghost. She carefully put the money, the card, and the photograph back in the wallet and then placed it on the polished coffee table. A down payment on a promise she intended to keep. The next morning, Silas received the preliminary report. It was worse than he thought. The predator from last night, a low-level enforcer named Marco Slim Rizzoli, wasn't a lone wolf. He was part of a crew run by a man named Benny the Weasel Gallo. Gallo's crew was a cancer in the Narrows, extorting the homeless, trafficking in desperation, and preying on the most vulnerable. And Benny Gallo, Silas remembered with a jolt of cold anger, used to be one of his guys. A bottom feeder, a gopher he wouldn't have trusted to wash his cars. But he had worn the ghost's emblem. He had learned his trade in Silas's organization, and now he was using that knowledge to terrorize children. It was a perversion of everything Silas had built. His own legacy, twisted and corrupt, was staring back at him. The report also confirmed his fears about Maya. Slim had been grooming her, offering protection for a price she couldn't pay, threatening her siblings if she didn't comply. Her desperate grab for his wallet hadn't been about a meal. It had been an attempt to buy her way out of a nightmare or to get enough money to run. A calm, white-hot fury settled over Silas. This wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. He had left that world behind, but a piece of it had just tried to harm a child under his watch. That was an infraction that could not stand. He called Dante. "Get the car," he said. "We're going back to the Narrows." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure, Si?" Dante asked, the use of the old nickname a sign of his concern. You step foot back there, you're not just a businessman anymore. The ghost comes back to life. The ghost is already awake, Silas replied, his voice flat and hard. And he's very, very disappointed in what's become of his kingdom. If this story proves that you can't escape your past, but you can use it to build a better future, hit subscribe and share it with everyone you know. Because Maya didn't run to the police or a social worker. She instinctively ran to the most powerful person she could find. And that person is about to move heaven and earth to prove she made the right choice. The Narrows hadn't changed. It was the same decaying labyrinth of brick tenements, shuttered factories, and dive bars that Silas remembered. The air still tasted of rust and regret. But as the Bentley glided through the streets, something was different. The car itself was an alien spacecraft, and the man inside it was a myth made flesh. People stopped and stared. Old-timers, men with faces like road maps of bad decisions, lowered their newspapers. Their eyes widened in disbelief, then in a kind of fearful reverence. The ghost was back. The word would spread like wildfire. Dante pulled up in front of a grimy social club. The Fox's Den, Benny Gallo's new headquarters. It used to be a laundromat that Silas's organization used to clean money. The irony was not lost on him. "Stay with the car," Silas ordered Dante, "and keep the engine running." "You sure you don't want backup?" Dante asked, his hand resting near his jacket again. "Benny Gallo isn't a threat," Silas said, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. "He's a disappointment. This is a performance review, not a war." Silas stepped out of the car, and the street went silent. He walked to the door of the club and pushed it open. The room was dark and smelled of stale beer and desperation. A handful of Gallo's thugs were playing cards at a table. They looked up, annoyed. Then they saw him. The card game ended abruptly. Benny the Weasel was in the back room, counting money. He was fat and balding now, a cheap imitation of the kind of power he thought he was projecting. He looked up as Silas filled the doorway, his face draining of color. Silas? He stammered, scrambling to his feet. "Mr. Kane, what are you doing here?" Silas walked into the room and closed the door behind him. He didn't speak. He just looked around the sordid little office, at the cheap wood paneling and the girly calendar on the wall. He let the silence stretch, letting Benny's fear build. This was a tool he had perfected long ago. Fear was a key, and it could open any lock. "You know, Benny," Silas began, his voice conversational, almost friendly. "I always thought you were pathetic, even when you worked for me. You were lazy, greedy, and stupid. A rare combination. I kept you around because you were too insignificant to be a threat. It seems I misjudged that." "Mr. Kane, I don't know what you're talking about," Benny sputtered, sweat beading on his forehead. Silas took a step closer. "Let me educate you. You have a man in your employ named Marco Rizzoli. They call him Slim." He paused. "Last night, he tried to put his hands on a child who is now under my protection. Your man, Benny. Your responsibility." The color drained completely from Benny's face. He understood now. "It was a mistake, Mr. Kane. A misunderstanding. Slim, he's an idiot. I'll handle him. I'll handle it right now. He's gone. You'll never see him again." "Oh, I know I won't," Silas said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "But that's not the solution. That's just pest control. We have a bigger problem, you and I. The problem is you. You're operating in my old house, using my old name as a shield. And you are bringing shame to it. You are a weed growing in my garden." Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number, Put me on speaker, he said to Benny. Benny fumbled with his own phone, his hands shaking. He dialed the number Silas showed him. A voice answered on the first ring. Yeah? It's Silas Kane, Silas said into the room. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Mr. Kane, the voice said, suddenly respectful, terrified. We all thought you were out. I am out, Silas said, but my name is not. And a man named Benny Gallo has been misusing it. He has been allowing his men to prey on the weak, on children in the Narrows, in my home. I didn't know, Mr. Kane, I swear, the voice pleaded. You know now, Silas said. Benny's business is now your business. You will absorb his operation. You will clean his house. You will find every man like Slim, and you will remove them, permanently. The extortion of the homeless, the preying on the weak, it all ends. Today. The Narrows is to be a sanctuary for those with nowhere else to go. Anyone who harms them answers to you. And you. Silas paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Answer to me. Do we have an understanding? Yes, Mr. Kane, the voice said, filled with a mix of terror and opportunity. Crystal clear. Silas nodded at Benny. Hang up. Benny did. He was looking at Silas like he was God himself. You see, Benny? Silas said softly, almost sadly. That's power, not this. He gestured around the room. This grubby little hole, not hurting children. Power is the ability to change the world with a single phone call. A lesson you never learned. He turned to leave. You have 1 hour to clear out this office. What happens to you after that is between you and your replacement. I suggest you run far and fast. He walked out of the club, past the terrified thugs, and back into the daylight. The street was still quiet, the residents watching from their windows. He had been in the Narrows for less than 15 minutes, but the message was delivered. The ghost had walked, and the world had tilted back onto its proper axis. The weeds had been pulled. He got back in the Bentley. Dante looked at him, a question in his eyes. The garbage has been taken out, Silas said, leaning his head back against the soft leather. He felt tired, not physically, but spiritually. It was so easy to slip back into that skin, so easy to use fear as a tool. But this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't for profit or power. It was for Maya, for Leo, for Rosie, for Lily. That night, he went to the apartment. Maya opened the door. She was wearing clean clothes, her hair was washed, and the look of hunted desperation was gone from her eyes. She held out the wallet. I didn't spend any of it, she said. The picture is still there. Silas took the wallet but didn't look inside. Keep the money, he said. Consider it back pay for the job you just got. Maya looked confused. What job? I'm starting a foundation, Silas explained, to help people like you, families who have fallen through the cracks. It's going to need a name, and it's going to need someone on its board of directors who understands what it's really like out there. Someone to keep it honest. He looked her straight in the eye. The job is yours if you want it. Maya was speechless. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time, they weren't tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of hope. What are you going to call it? The Lily Kane Haven, Silas said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm calling it the Lily Kane Haven. 5 years later, the Lily Kane Haven was no longer a blueprint or a promise. It was a reality. A sleek, modern 5-story building of glass and warm brick that stood on the very spot where a squalid encampment once huddled. It wasn't a shelter. It was a launch pad. It offered 75 transitional housing units, a daycare, a culinary training program, and on-site social workers and legal aid. In its first 5 years of operation, it had provided safe housing for over 300 families, served nearly 500,000 meals, and helped 150 adults find stable, long-term employment. Its high school graduation and college acceptance rates for resident teens were higher than any of the city's public schools. It was a statistical miracle built on a foundation of grief and gold. Silas Kane stood on the rooftop garden, looking out over the city. He was 53 now. The Brioni suits were the same, the gold chain was still a permanent fixture, and the tattoos on his neck and hands were no less stark. But something in his eyes had changed. The dead calm had been replaced by a watchful peace. The door to the roof opened, and Maya walked out. At 22, she was a force of nature. She carried herself with a confidence that was born not of privilege, but of survival and triumph. She had graduated summa cum laude from the City University with a degree in social work and was now the Haven's Director of Youth Outreach. Her siblings were thriving. Leo was a 12-year-old honor student and aspiring astronaut, and Rosie, now 8, was a fiery, precocious artist whose work decorated the halls of the Haven. The board approved the expansion for the new legal clinic, she said, her voice bright and professional as she stood beside him. And Leo got an A on his physics midterm. I never doubted either, Silas said, a rare, genuine smile gracing his lips. He looked at her, at the incredible young woman she had become. You did good, Maya. We did good, she corrected him gently. She looked at his hands, at the hold-fast tattoos that had once seemed so menacing. I still remember that night, you know. I was so scared. I saw you and I thought, that's the most dangerous man I've ever seen. He's my only hope. Was I? Silas asked, his voice quiet. You were, she confirmed. But you were also the kindest. You were the monster who scared away the other monsters. If this story reminded you that the strongest people are often those who have turned their own pain into a shield for others, subscribe, share, and comment below. Because somewhere right now, a child is looking for someone strong enough to help, and a legacy is waiting to be born from a single act of compassion. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city lights begin to glitter as dusk settled. Do you ever miss it? Maya asked, her voice soft. The old life? The power? Silas thought for a long moment. He thought of Benny the Weasel, of the fear in his eyes. He thought of the empty throne he had left behind, the kingdom of shadows. He had commanded armies, controlled city blocks, made and unmade fortunes with a word. But it was all dust. It was all ghosts. He looked at the playground below, where the laughter of children, Rosie's among them, drifted up on the evening air. He looked at Maya, his living, breathing legacy of redemption. He thought of the photo of Lily he still carried in his wallet, not as a reminder of what he had lost, but of what he had to protect. That life is a ghost story I tell myself sometimes to remember who I'm not anymore, he said, his voice a low, powerful rumble. He turned to face the city he had once bled, and now was healing. I'm not a kingpin. I'm not a gangster. I'm not the ghost. He put a heavy, warm hand on Maya's shoulder, the gold rings cool against her jacket. I am a promise keeper,